All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Marcos Codenegron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Rets. Ben, the draft is over. We got our new guys. How are you feeling today?
The draft was a great opportunity for me to really just kind of get back into football. After the Super Bowl, as you know, as many of you know, I was super down and football was the last thing I wanted to talk about. But seeing just these guys get drafted, seeing the whole draft process, it really got me amped up and ready to go for the football season.
Yeah, I believe that the draft is a really good place to restore your, feelings, to get back into the good vibes of everything. And I also think the draft is really cool because it tells a story of what your team kind of wants to do going into the season. So I think that, and we're definitely going to break it down a little bit as we go. But before we break down any of our draft talk, for all of you guys listening on audio and want to check out our pretty faces, come find us on YouTube, Behind the Back Podcast. Give us a like, subscribe, follow, all that fun jazz. But if you're listening on audio, give us a review, rate the show. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say, and we'd love it. It'd help us out a ton. So we got a lot of fun, interesting topics to break down. We're going to discuss the Eagles draft and the Niners draft and kind of some stuff that's, and all the stories that we kind of talked about last week going into this. So let's start with the Eagles. I think the Eagles draft was exciting in its own right. I'm extremely hyped. And it didn't even start on the draft. It started before the draft. A couple hours before the draft, the Eagles announced that they re-signed A.J. Brown to a 3-year, $96 million extension. And Amon-Ra St. Brown's $120 million deal was a record-breaking deal for one day until the A.J. Brown deal happened. They gave him $88 million in guarantees for this contract, which is now the most in NFL history.
I have to ask you, with that contract, do you feel like he's overpaid?
No, absolutely not. He is a top 3 receiver whose numbers are on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and he's gotten 1,400 yards in the past 2 years, together in each season, and has been our far away best receiver. No, shade to Devontae. It's just AJ is our, bell cow in terms of our prime receiver. He is worthy of $32 million. And that's the part that I love about this AJ Brown deal is you're getting him at $32 million a year, how he once again gets ahead of the curve. And still guys like Brandon Aiyuk, guys like Justin Jefferson, guys like CeeDee Lamb haven't been signed yet. So he sets the market. And then by the time those guys get signed, or at least maybe, Justin Jefferson, Jamar, it it's going to look like a relatively fair deal, a good deal. So I was happy to see it. And we have him for the entirety of his prime from his age 27 to age 32. He just had his press conference today. He talked about how he wants to retire an Eagle. He loves the support system here. So for all the drama that's been, that was kind of tossed around last year with, oh, is AJ unhappy and all this crap, he kind of put all that to bed by signing this long-term deal. And again, he was in the middle of a 4-year, $100 million contract. So the fact that Howie was able to get this done midway through the deal was masterclass for me. And again, right before the draft, I couldn't have gotten better news. So I don't know if you have any takes on that.
I mean, it's an expensive deal, but I think you look at the production you get out of AJ, and like you said, he's on his way to having some Hall of Fame numbers. He's I think he's worth close to that money. If I was a fan of the Eagles, I'd probably be like, I'm very comfortable with this. I'd also be really comfortable knowing that my GM once again got ahead of the curve. And that's, I mean, something that you really got to tip your hat to just with the Eagles. I mean, we talked about it last week. It's paying these guys ahead of time so that you're not having to eat 10, 20 mil, 30 mil later because you waited on it too long. And again, that could be something to do with agents of players and so on. Like, there is obviously a healthy system going on in the offices in Philadelphia, at least in that, Eagles organization, because players are willing to sign these deals quickly, and the team is ready to get those deals done early. So yeah, it's good to see, and definitely congrats on that for sure.
Yeah, I was beyond excited because they announced it earlier that morning. They're like, oh, they're talking about an AJ Brown extension. I was like, oh, this is great. I didn't think it was gonna it was gonna be done that day. I was like, that was nuts. So the vibes, are kind of all of a sudden our core is together for the next AJ Brown's the longest extended one to 2029, but we have everybody through 2028. So that includes Saquon, we got Goddard, Smith. So our core guys are together, and that is crucial, especially they're all in their primes. This is the Eagles' window has now kind of reopened in a way where it felt like it kind of closed a little last year with the collapse and all the uncertainty and the bad vibes. And it felt like the stability has kind of been restored, at least on the offensive side of the ball, when this happened. So all this happened before the draft, and it gave me that much better of a feeling of how things went. So now that we'll move off the AJ stuff here. Again, super hyped for him. I'm happy for him. Fly Eagles fly. But let's talk about the main event. The Eagles draft class. I'm going to throw it up here. Was surprising to say the least because this NFL draft was kind of nuts. 6 quarterbacks taken in the top 12. That doesn't happen, and that is the kind of recipe to get players to fall in spots that you weren't expecting previously. I don't know if you thought that, any craziness with the first, kind of 12-ish picks, if you thought that that was going to end up that way.
I don't think anybody did, especially like Michael Penix being drafted to the Falcons. Like, who would have guessed that the Falcons were going to take a quarterback with their first pick, knowing they needed a wide receiver, like they needed an option. Like, it's kind of crazy. The way that this draft went early on set the tone for the next 2 rounds after that, and just seeing some of these guys end up in the hands of organizations that never thought they had a shot at them, like this was an interesting draft to say the least.
For sure. And again, the board just fell the way it did, and the first defensive player wasn't taken until 15 with Laiatu Latu to the Colts. And I was, as the picks kept getting closer, I was like, holy crap, we might end up with our guys. So going into this, draft, I would have been happy with one of Cooper DeJean, Terry and Arnold, or Quinyon Mitchell. And I thought the Eagles were going to trade up. I thought that the opportunity was there. And they ended up staying pat, and at 22, they took Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo, my number one cornerback going into this, but I didn't really elaborate on him too much because I didn't think the Eagles were going to get him because
Right.
this whole mock draft process, he was talked about as a top 12 guy. So I was like, I love him, but I think he's out of our range. And lo and behold, he just falls into our laps at 22, and I couldn't be more excited. Like, he comes with a little bit of age. He's 23, but he's pro ready. I understand that the knocks on him on him are he played at a small school in Toledo, but he got options. Like, he got offers to move from Toledo. Nick Saban tried to recruit him to Alabama. Like, teams wanted him, and he stayed loyal to Toledo and just played his way through there. And he also faced guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., like Jackson Smith and Jigba in their time in Ohio State. So he's had good matchups. And again, he shined in the Senior Bowl where he was just locking guys up like future, San Francisco 49er Ricky Pearsall. I forget one of the Michigan guys. I forget his name, but it was one of the Michigan guys he was paired on the whole time. But he was just locking them down, and he made a good impression throughout this entire NFL draft process that you would want to see in a small school guy. So he's sticky. He's great in zone. One of the knocks on him would be like he doesn't play a ton of press man coverage, but with the Eagles' new defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, that's not something that's going to be asked of him. And again, part of what we alluded to when it says when you draft guys, when your team draft guys, it kind of tells the story of what they're planning on doing. So you get a corner like Quinyon Mitchell, and it just shows that when the Eagles didn't trade up, it told me that they were going to be okay with either getting Quinyon or going to be okay with getting Terry and Arnold in that spot. Because if you wanted him that bad, you would trade up before anybody even had the opportunity. So the fact that they got to just get their pick of their guy was awesome. That was my like most important draft pick because it set the corner of the future with, we can potentially just get rid of James Bradbury at this point if we really wanted to because of just that pick alone, and it added depth and versatility. But the one that mattered the most to me in this draft, the one that made the biggest impression, was the Eagles trading up from 50 to 40 with the Washington Commanders to end up with Cooper DeJean, the other corner defensive back from Iowa. And I talked about it in our little mock draft simulator. I didn't think they were going to double dip in this particular spot, but They did, and they drafted Cooper, a versatile guy, and had Quignon not been drafted, we're talking about Cooper DeJean as our corner to our outside corner, the other guy playing alongside Slay. You can just throw him in there. But now with Quignon Mitchell, all of a sudden Cooper DeJean kind of can be the utility guy. Like we can throw him at safety, we can throw him at nickel, we can throw him on the outside. So that's going to be the question coming in for Cooper DeJean is where is he going to be? And in a complicated system like Vic Fangio, that's going to be the biggest question. My biggest concern is that they're going to throw too much at him right away. I just hope that the best way to use Cooper will be to say, hey, you're going to predominantly play these snaps here, and you're just going to learn this part, and then we're just going to get you in as he goes. But with the Eagles double dipping, they're just throwing bodies at the corner position, and people can view it as kind of an overcorrection where it's like, our deficiency last year was we were old and slow on the defensive backfield, and all of a sudden we just bring a lot of young dudes who are quick and athletic and fast and throwing on the field, and hopefully one of these guys sticks. I think that's the right way to approach the defensive backfield that's had so much trouble. So I was really happy with this pick. I don't know how you felt in the moment. I know how you felt because you texted us in that moment, but I want to get your reaction to what you thought when we got Cooper at that moment.
Honestly, I was just I wasn't shocked because I knew that you guys were going to draft him once everything fell the way it did. Um, I was upset because that was originally who I wanted at pick 31 for the Niners. And I'll get into that a little bit more once we start talking Niners, but you know, I was of this mindset where it was like, how do the Eagles keep getting away with things like this? And once again, like just you talked about double dipping. Like you guys went from ranch to barbecue sauce, like top two dipping sauces. Like how do you continue to land these awesome prospects? But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of where he fits in and what that timeline looks like. But yeah, overall, just a great pickup for you guys.
Yeah, I was again super excited, and just off of those two picks alone, I'm already, whatever else came our way was just gravy to me. So I think if I had to pick, so I don't, we'll brush on some of these guys because not that's the part of the draft is some of these guys are future, right? Like they're not gonna come out and be ready right away. But the one that caught the hearts of Philly was them selecting Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in the 5th round. And for those who don't know, I did allude to this last week, but for those who don't know, Jeremiah Trotter Sr., his father, was a legend in Philadelphia. He played for the Eagles for 12 seasons, got 2 All Pros, 4 Pro Bowls. He was a stud. The Axeman is what they called him. He had a super dope celebration, which Jeremiah Trotter Jr. does do as well, which is also pretty sick. So if anything, it gave Howie Roseman major brownie points for the city of Philadelphia drafting the legacy guy. And it's really cool. And, Jeremiah Trotter's story is sad. His mother passed away last year. So this was kind of a big moment for him and his dad to kind of just share this moment together. And Jeffrey Lurie, who's known Trotter Jr. since he was a baby, he was getting emotional, with the moment, just saying like, I've known you since you were 2. Like this is a, emotional day for us too. So I love the pick. Will he see the field? I'm not sure. And that's the thing about the legacy guys though, because his dad was so well respected, he's going to get kind of a longer leash and everyone's going to want him to come in anyway. And they just want to see him play. So that's something that, good story. We'll see how it develops down the line. But I think if I had to pick a least favorite pick in this draft, which again, that's just me kind of nitpicking, I would say would be our running back, Will Shipley from Clemson that we drafted in the 4th round. I thought, nice little running back. And the trend that I noticed in this draft, and I'm sure a lot of media pundits have pointed out, is like when one team selected a specific position, like for example, the Eagles, when they drafted Cooper DeJean, all of a sudden like 4 more corners went off the board. When the Eagles drafted Quignon Mitchell, like a few more corners went off the board. And when the Eagles drafted Will Shipley, like 4 running backs came off the board. So it was really interesting to see teams just kind of say, okay, here we go. Like now let me go grab our guy. So Will Shipley's fine, but he's also going to be like running back 3. It just adds depth. I didn't think it was anything special when there's a couple other guys on the board that I would have enjoyed at that time. but I'm not going to knock Howie on this draft. I think he did a really good job getting depth into the room, like Anais Smith, a wide receiver out of Texas A&M, and we went for the gamble and took the big man Johnny Wilson, the huge wide receiver from Florida State. That was an interesting pick, and we got a couple offensive linemen in the later rounds, Trevor Keegan from Michigan and Dylan McMahon from NC State, and Trevor Keegan's a cool connection because him and Lane Johnson have the same agent, so they've known each other for a few years now. So that'll be a cool little story. But overall, like the fact that we ended up with 2 out of my top 3 targets going into this draft, for me personally, was, we talked about this. Like I like to go into this draft stuff, so it was a very vindicating moment where the fact that we ended up with 2 dudes who I viewed as like super important, and consensus wise, the Eagles look like the team who got away with a really good draft and by ending up stealing these guys essentially based off of where they drafted them. So um if I had to give this Eagles draft a grade, it would be an A+. Just overall exciting, and on top of that, part of that can be added that the AJ Brown deal just hours before is icing on the cake. So Howie, the off season's always Howie season. We never really know if these guys are going to hit, but in the grand scheme of things for how it looks right now, I think they did a really good job just getting the value where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think everybody around the NFL, fans and organizations would agree, like an A+ draft for the Eagles. Like it's kind of not close. And just to see some of the guys that fell to the Eagles, and you talk about, you don't really know how some of them are going to pan out, but you always try and set yourself up for the future as best you can, and that's based on film. That's based on having these guys, these prospects come into your organization and spend a day with them and pick their brains, see what they're like. Are they going to fit your mentality, the mentality of your organization? And I think that that's one thing, like especially with the Niners and the Eagles, these two organizations, they do business a lot differently, but the mentality is very similar. And so I think for the Eagles, for the Niners, like the biggest things going into these are, where's your mental at? Are you ready to give everything you've got to this? Are you ready to this is your job now? Understand this kind of thing. And when our organizations like a prospect, they're going to take them at wherever they feel is best. And that is something that the Niners did that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But
Mhm.
overall, I do agree. Eagles A+ draft for sure. Just talk. I'm looking at the Eagles going into this draft, and I'm thinking they need to have a damn good draft. I don't think they needed to have as good of what they had to be, to set up. You guys probably could have drafted like probably Cooper DeJean and that would have been fine. Like after Cooper
Exactly.
DeJean, it didn't really matter, right?
Hmm.
But you were set up at that point, and then you guys continued to rack up great picks. So just to be able to set yourself up for the now and then for the future in the ways that you guys did in the positions you did, you can't ask for much better.
I agree. And if there's one thing I just couldn't stop thinking about after drafting Quinyon and Cooper is all of a sudden with all these bodies that we have on the defensive backfield, I'm thinking to myself, man, we can line this up in a million different ways. And all of a sudden it looks a lot better. We got Slay on one side, Quinyon Mitchell on the other, CJ Gardner Johnson in the nickel. You can put Cooper out there as well with Reed. And that looks great. And then with Darius Slay moves on, then we got Keely Ringo who can get some times in there. We have Eli Ricks to throw in there. So now all of a sudden this depth that we didn't have last year currently exists, and we have Sidney Brown too. And like what you mentioned too with the Niners and Eagles really picking their guys, the Eagles have what they call like red star players, and that's their version of like these are high character guys that we want in our building if certain guys don't fall. But 5 out of our 8 draft picks were red star guys. So it ended up, the Eagles knew who
That's
they were
cool.
getting, and they had an idea of their character coming in, and most of these guys came in for the top 30 visit, which was another good thing. So it was I'm so happy to see what happens because all of a sudden the Eagles have youth and are trying to overcorrect in a way that I think could work. And again, I don't know if it's going to work, but it makes me more excited going into next season that I don't see as big of a weakness as I thought it was going to be going into the season. So it elevated, I think, for me, what the Eagles' ceiling can be, um, especially at this stage. And we can get those young guys out there right away, and I think that'll be super important. So all in all, I'm hyped. So I think that's it for me on the Eagles so far. Let's talk the Niners. So I'm gonna throw the Niners picks up here. So Ben, the Niners. This was, I think, an overall a good draft, but there was definitely a lot of interesting decisions made. But I'm gonna let you talk about some of your favorite guys, maybe, and anything that you thought was questionable. So, floor is yours.
Yeah, so obviously there were some interesting choices made at interesting times. And it came very early on, that first interesting decision, and that was drafting Ricky Pearsall with the 31st pick in the draft. Now, I talked about going into this draft like we needed cornerback, we needed wide receiver, and we needed the offensive line. And I told you like there's based on history, like there's a chance that the Niners take an edge just to try and pair somebody with Nick. And honestly, like I really didn't see, considering the wide receivers that were off the board, I did not see this scenario happening where they take Ricky Pearsall. When I was looking at who the best available was on the board at 31, Cooper DeJean was right there. And
Yeah,
I really thought like when it was the Niners time to choose, I was like, we're getting Cooper and this is awesome because like that is depth right there. We talk about how the Niners are going to have a personnel issue where we don't have anybody contracted after next year for cornerback. Like we need to get somebody in the building now to really try and get them ready for when they take that ultimately starting role starting in 2025. And so I was hyped, I was ready. And then Ricky Pearsall, my immediate response to that, I was like, what are we doing? Like
yeah, I was
I
about to
was
say.
I was pissed. I really was. I was upset about it. I didn't know a lot about Ricky Pearsall. I watched a little bit about him. Obviously, I did see last year when he made that insane catch that was probably the best catch in college football history. And that's a personal opinion, but I think a lot of people would agree.
One of the catches of the year for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if you haven't seen it, go out there and look up Ricky Pearsall insane catch, and it's the first thing you'll find. But yeah, I was shook to say the least. And then I kind of took a step back from the draft. Luckily, that was the end of the first round. I had a chance to kind of reset my mind, and I thought about it, and I'm like, John Lynch and this Niners organization does their best work in the later rounds. And honestly, like looking at this draft, I'm overall pretty pleased with how the Niners did. But just to talk a little bit about Ricky, he's a fifth year senior out of Florida. Right now, he's ready to play. He's not necessarily a Brandon Ayuk replacement, and I know he's a lot like Brandon Ayuk, but I have kind of a take as to why I don't think he's going to be a replacement for Brandon Ayuk. But Ricky's a solid slot receiver. He's got amazing hands, like great tracking skills. If you watch any of these highlights, this guy, like when the ball is in the air, he's looking around for it, he tracks it, and he's always got his hands almost on the ball, if not every time. And his body control is awesome. He has this short bursts of speed that create great separation. Like he's perfect through the middle, which is something that in this Niners offense, with where we try to dump off the ball the most, we try and get going through the numbers if we can through the air. And so to have somebody at the slot position that isn't Christian McCaffrey, that we can, have hit two moves, and then he's in the middle, and most of the time that separation is there. You talk about having Brock Purdy, who's really good at timing, really good at other things like that. It's a whole take. Don't worry, I'll get into it. Like this was a great pick. Just not at the time that we took him. Like I would be hyped, if really hyped. This would be an A+ pick for me if this pick happened in the second round. So the fact that it happened in the first round, it does make me believe this Niners organization is is pretty locked into this guy. Obviously, I don't think it was their guy. I think there was probably another guy before that they wanted to take, but he was off the board. Hard to say. We'll never necessarily know for sure. But to take Ricky at where they did, they have a lot of faith in him, I'm sure. But yeah, he's going to be a good pick. I really do believe. He did do some punt returns in college as well, and he never muffed a punt. So that's one thing to keep in mind, considering the Niners no longer have Ray McCloud. So that's, we actually have a punt returner now, and I think he could do like majority of where I see him playing the most this year to start, at least, is probably in that punt return. And I think that's where he's going to see a lot of time and kind of get his feel for it. And then we'll throw him in on some plays here and there, and we'll see kind of how he works out. And look, man, I really think that he's got some future here if he's utilized correctly. So overall, I give that pick just like I would give it a B minus, just considering where it was taken.
And who else was on the board? Yeah, it makes sense. And again, there's like the questions of part of me felt like some of the picks, especially I guess the Ricky Pearsall pick in general, was almost like a safe pick, right?
Yeah.
Like you get a guy who you'll be able to use at some point, maybe not as much this year, but and we're gonna get into the conversation of your current roster. But in terms of that, I was on the same boat as you. I thought they were getting Cooper or Kool-Aid or one of the guys that you had pegged. There was a lot of different ways they could have gone, and when they drafted Ricky Pearsall, I was thinking to myself, I was like, kind of interesting, like, to say the least. So we'll see how that pans out. I agree with you. He's a solid young player who can do a lot of things, and you can put him anywhere on that Niners offense. And obviously, with Kyle Shanahan's play design, he can get open anywhere. I do think he's a good fit. So it'll be interesting to see. But who else did you like from this draft class of yours?
So the next pick that I would pick that like I was actually really pleased with came in the second round, and it was our very next pick. That was number 62 in Ronaldo Green. He's a cornerback out of Florida State, and I give this one a B plus. The reason being, number one, we need that cornerback. We need to get somebody in the building that we can really start to groom and get familiar with this system, right? Looking at Ronaldo Green in college, he's really good at press man. He's got some hybrid player potential there, meaning you can kind of move him around in that secondary. And in last year, he locked up Malik Neighbors, who went number 6 to the Giants. And that was like pretty cool. And when I heard about that, I like looked at those highlights, and he really did. Like he put the clamps on him, like it was straps all day. And so that got me pretty hyped up about him. He led the ACC in pass breakups in 2023, and he only allowed one pass for 20 plus yards last year. His ball instinct is great. Like I think he's going to fit really well with this defensive system that's in place. Obviously, it's a new system, but I trust that this defensive schematic that Brandon's going to bring in, like it's going to be effective. It's going to be something that he's going to have Ronaldo Green. He'll have a year to kind of, work him into it. And then when we run into that cornerback issue next year, we'll know kind of what to do at that point. Are we ready to move him into a starting position? Will he start this year? It's hard to tell, who pans out kind of thing. So overall, though, I am pleased with that pick. And we got our cornerback. I was really hyped about. But my last favorite pick came in round 4, pick 129. Isaac Girendo, and he's the running back out of Louisville. That's, I think, my number one favorite pick, actually.
Interesting.
I give that one an A. He can run the ball. He can catch the ball. We talk about how good that running back room in the Niners organization is at any given year. This guy just adds to it. I would think the best part of his game in a lot of ways is his pass protection and blocking. And that's something that Kyle Shanahan, every single person out there needs to be able to block. You have to be able to protect that pass. You talk about the wide receivers and Brandon and Deebo, and then to the tight ends, everybody needs to be able to throw a block when it matters. And when we're going to go through the air, because I think this year we're going to be leaning on the air more often than not, this guy's going to be a great option for protection. So he's got great size, great speed. Um, I think Shanny's going to figure out a really good way to use him. He's similar to Elijah Mitchell in a lot of ways, and the biggest difference is it could come down to availability. I mean, we talk about how availability is one of the best abilities in this league. And unfortunately, like, I love Elijah Mitchell, but he's had so many injuries throughout his career to this point that it's frustrating and it's sad to see him continuously getting hurt and just not being able to stick on the field. And it's affecting that room for sure. But that was a really good pick. Um, after that, we got our offensive guards. Like, we got Jarrett Kingston, who is offensive guard out of USC. He allowed 0 sacks last year, as well as in the third round, pick 86, we took Dominic Pooney, sorry,
Love that
offensive
guy.
guard and offensive tackle hybrid, which is awesome because who knows with Trent Williams, like, it's every year it comes down to Trent. How long can you do it one more year? Can you do it
Yeah.
again? Can you do it again? Like, we keep pushing this ball down the court, down the field, but eventually Trent's time's going to be up. So we had to get somebody behind Trent that can really take the ropes, and to take Dominic Puny at a number 86, like, we needed the O-line addressed. He has plenty of experience playing that tackle position. He was one of 3 players in college ball at left tackle to not give up a sack in 700 snaps. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Great agility. I think he'll fit really well with the Niners. And I think he was the 6th-year senior too. So that was the other, like, kind of theme that I saw with the Niners, is they took a lot of 5th and 6th-year players. And it makes me feel like they're leaning on more experience than anything, because they want some players that are going to be closer to ready to go for the near future. Because we talk about some of these contracts coming to an end, some of these guys that may not be able to pay in the near future. So overall, I am really pleased with the draft. Malik Mustafa was a safety out of Wake Forest. He's going to be a great pick for us. I would overall give a grade on this draft a B. The Niners took a lot of workhorses in this draft, very representative of the culture that the Niners want to continue to embody moving forward. And they went after depth and future replacements, and that's what they got. So I'm pretty hyped, to be honest with you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and like you can see a world where guys like Dominic Pooney or Puny or however I forget the pronunciation, but him um and Pearsall, and I even think the Mustafa guy could get on the field because of like
Mm-hmm.
injuries, and like you mentioned, like, and they got guys that are similar to the players that they have on the roster, which is a smart way to do it. And I like the Jacob Cowing pick from Arizona. That was a good one too. Because you add another semi returner who could also operate in the slot if you need him to. Like, they got smart pieces, and that's what I was asking earlier, if it felt like, kind of safe picks, because you want reliable kind of pieces that you can kind of figure like, oh, we can throw this guy in now and he should be able to contribute to what we bring. So, I
Yeah.
liked the draft too. So yeah.
Yeah, and for sure, like, the Niners were in a different scenario. I don't even want to compare, like, Niners and Eagles to scenarios and stuff like that, because totally different. The
Agreed.
Niners didn't need to have an A-plus draft. The Eagles didn't either, but they needed to have a better draft than the Niners. The Niners had to account for the future. They had to think about some things. They needed to adjust the O-line. They finally kind of did that. It's still iffy, but
Yeah.
but you talk about, like, all these playmakers around the fields for both teams. The Niners, like, they have had this roster for a while. They've had this core together for a while. There's one guy that they need to work on paying. Can they get it done? Like, we're going to see that happen. I have a take on that in a few minutes. But ultimately, like, just a B overall, a C plus grade draft would have gotten the job done for the Niners this year. And I think they exceeded that. So I'm
Right.
pleased.
And again, the same thing with like how the Eagles, all these draft grades, like at the end of the day, nobody knows for sure until they get on the field and they play.
Right.
So like this is all just projection. And that's the fun of it. And that's also like the way where you have to take a step back and not overreact to it, right? Like, it's cool that you get new fun guys in the building, but we don't know how any of these guys are going to pan out. Um, but that's what makes this so interesting. So I agree with you that the way the Niners drafted was interesting, and but also like it was smart. Like it was smart to take the safe picks when you knew who you wanted. Like it that was important. Um so let's get into like kind of the whole vibes of it all, right? So we talked about earlier on the Eagles side of things how AJ Brown got signed and all of a sudden this offense, how he kind of restored any fear that Eagles fans had during the offseason from the collapse. Like going into this season, I was like, man, like what are we gonna do? Like, I'm not sure what we're gonna do. And we ended up signing Saquon. We had guys retire, but all of a sudden we feel like we're in a position where we're still gonna be able to contend, and the vibes have been practically restored. Obviously, come week one, the microscope's gonna be on us. If we lose, if we struggle early, that could all come crashing down. But right now, those vibes have kind of been restored. How do you feel on the Niners side of things? Because this entire draft was kind of haunted by the fact that, like, oh, are even Deebo Samuel or Brandon Aiyuk going to be on this team? They're both still on here, and I'm pretty sure the Niners said that they're going to move forward with both of them. But like, what are the vibes there? And what are your takes on Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo, if you have any?
So this take is going to be solely based on feeling. Nothing. Let me put it this way. Yes, the 49ers have said things in the past that haven't necessarily been true. They did say that they're going to run this core back, and obviously we're still waiting on a Brandon Aiyuk contract, right? But I have a lot of faith that we are going to sign Brandon Aiyuk this year. We're going to run it back with Brandon and Deebo. What this draft really showed me, specifically in the wide receiver position, was that the identity on offense of the 49ers moving forward is going to be different. And that's exactly what needed to happen. Okay, we didn't draft guys that run through your chest. We drafted guys who will make a double move, break your ankles, and get open and get yards after catch based on just being wide open in the field. We didn't get a guy like Deebo who's going to dominate you, like run through three guys and then continue to stay up. We didn't get a guy like George Kittle who's going to carry four guys down the field. No, we got guys who are going to make two moves, get wide open, and we're banking on our quarterback who has elite timing, elite accuracy, and elite football IQ. What this draft really showed me is the 49ers have a lot of faith in Brock Purdy. And that, to me, is huge moving forward. And what that also tells me is after this year, this is a feeling. Again, this is a feeling. After this year, win or lose, Deebo will be the one who goes. And we will remain with guys who are similar to Brandon Aiyuk, guys who can just get open in the field and bank on your quarterback making that play. We've had too many quarterbacks prior to Brock who couldn't make a consistent throw downfield, who couldn't make the right play more often than not, right? The best guy in the past 8 years, basically, was Jimmy G. And even he had so many inconsistent times. And it's frustrating to the point where you draft guys like Deebo and George, where you can dump it off 5 yards, and let them go down 25 yards. Talk about getting chunk plays without using your quarterback. That's something that the Niners don't have to do anymore. That's something that they now have a lot of faith in Brock. They see what Brock can do. They see what he has done. And this team, they're going to bank on his future and his continued success in what he's elite at. And then we talked about that timing, that IQ, and that accuracy. That's something that could be very, very valuable for the guys that they just drafted. So that's my take on it.
I think, when you put it that way, I think that's a really good take because I didn't think about it that way because I'm thinking to myself, you and I have talked in this pod a million times on how important Deebo is to this offense, right? And how it's a part of like the Shanahan kind of scheme of it all. But you also alluded to the fact that if we want to keep a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, we might have to adjust the scheme a little bit. And I think that if anyone can do it, it is Kyle. And it is interesting that I do also agree with your take that they do believe in Brock, that they are committed to Brock and his potential growth, because I do think Brock has the ability to continue to stay consistent. Now, will he be a top MVP candidate every year? That remains to be seen. We're going to find out this year if, that level of consistency stays. And again, part of that is, like, are the vibes going to survive? And we saw with the Eagles last year going into it, winning kind of kept everything at bay until we didn't, and then things kind of fell apart. And we've talked about this. It's hard. It's damn near impossible to, go to the Super Bowl after losing, going back after losing. It's tough. It's a tough road. But if there's any teams that can kind of do it, it is teams like the Eagles and the Niners who have built a good culture. But I do wonder, with these trade talks, and we kind of, talking Kings here for a second, we talked about how, like, the trade deadline affected guys like Kevin Huerter and things of that nature, right? How much do you think that, like, having your names being that publicly thrown out in the air during this draft process, and then let's say they don't sign him right away, don't sign Brandon Aiyuk right away at least, like, and they don't do it until kind of later on in the offseason, do you think that kind of just sets the tone for the season, whereas they could have done this a little earlier? Like, do you have any opinions on that?
If you want to make it back to a Super Bowl, if you want to make it deeper, if you want to be better than where you were last year, you can't hold those kind of things in the back of your mind. But if you do, you use it as motivation. And that's one thing, like, with any of the guys on this team, this Niners team, like, they are dogs to the point where they will use something like this as fuel, not necessarily for their team, but for themselves. And that's something, like, especially with Deebo, let's talk about week 13. I hate to bring this up, week 13 in Philadelphia, when Deebo scored 4 touchdowns and went crazy on the Eagles. Well, he was waiting for that. He was waiting for that to prove a point. He waited so many weeks to prove that he was and his team was better than what was shown on that field back in the NFC Championship game the year before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, like, there's a really good chance, yeah, it could very well hold some mental space for these guys, but I don't think it'll be something negative. I think these guys are good enough professionals, good enough players, that they're going to use this as fuel, and they're only going to get better from here. It could be to prove their own organization wrong, but it's something that we've seen before.
I do think that, despite their differences in coaching and differences in, like, systems, I do think that both our coaches and both our GMs serve as kind of like a similar role, right? Like, Kyle Shanahan sets a culture, Nick Sirianni sets a culture, but Howie Roseman and John Lynch are like the stabilizers to it all for both of our teams. And I think it's interesting
Agreed.
that when they go through, it's like, that's why people view our guys, our GM specifically, as kind of like the rock to our coaches. It's interesting. I think that dynamic can't be understated. And because Kyle and Nick couldn't be further from opposite in terms of how they operate, because Kyle's much more serious than Nick is. But,
Mm-hmm.
like, John Lynch is the perfect combo for Kyle, just like Howie's the perfect combo for Nick. And I think that I agree with you that the Niners guys who have been there, done that, like Brandon, these guys have seen the Super Bowl multiple times now. They want that, and they can't not want that as pros. And my hope is that for you guys, at least, even, as an Eagles fan, I want the Niners to be a competitive team, and I want to see what, just, you want to face the competition at its best. You don't want to do it when all this drama surrounding it. So I'm hoping that the Niners can sign BA, but I do agree with your take that if they were to move on from a receiver, it would be Deebo, because you can't, I'm not going to say Deebo, like, you can always find another Deebo, but, like, a player who can be physical, you can replace that too. So it'll be interesting to see. And again, with the Niners draft, they did a good job preparing for this future. They're at least they're trying to.
Yes.
Nothing is guaranteed, but they're trying to. They're addressing it. They're aware of it. So we're not going to be surprised if a guy like Ricky Pearsall actually gets legit minutes because Deebo goes down for a few games. So it's like, and maybe that will open up the offense in a way that Kyle probably wasn't expecting, which in the long run could help. So Yeah, no, it'll be interesting, and that dynamic with the whole BA Deebo is something we're gonna have to keep an eye on in the coming weeks or months, however long it takes. Um, Let me ask you a question because you asked me if I thought AJ Brown at $32 million was overpaid. What do you think for BA would be the sweet spot? Because we got Amon-Ra St. Brown at 30 mil, right? Devontae Smith is 25 mil. And now AJ Brown is now the top at 32, and that'll probably continue to go up as CD Lamb and Justin Jefferson get signed. Um, where would you be like? You'd be like, oh, this was a great position, or ooh, this might be too much. What's like your range for you?
I would take him between 28 and 30, and I'd genuinely be happy with it.
Okay.
And I think that he'll want somewhere in that range. Just seeing the guys that did get paid this offseason, and I don't know Brandon Ayuk, but looking at like seeing how well he plays and how highly he talks about himself, it's not in a cocky manner, but he knows the player he is, and he knows what he's worth. I know he's asking for a lot of money, but this is a guy that he hasn't been given a legit wide receiver one role, and yet he's playing like a wide receiver one. And I'm just so curious to see what it's like to have him as a true wide receiver one and get the same amount of targets that these guys do. Because then 28 mil could be a freaking steal. We don't know.
Yeah, no, you make a good point because nobody paid attention to CD Lamb until he was their top target and getting, he got like 100, 88 to 100 catches a year because Dak's force feeding him the ball. And AJ
Right.
is a very similar comp, but AJ's production is yards after catch as well. So that's why it makes the deal more worth it to me because you got AJ and Devontae who can put up 1,000 yards together for 2 straight seasons. You can show that it's done. So I love the fact that we're able to lock our guys down in that kind of position. So for BA, I do think it's just a matter of scheming him open and just giving him the chance. Like the Niners kind of put themselves in this position where they're unsure because they never really gave BA the full chance because of like his trajectory throughout the time with the Niners. Like his rookie season, he was in the doghouse for a minute, and like who knew if Kyle actually liked him at first. So it's like I hope that it gets to a point where like maybe to take some of the pressure off of Deebo's like getting hit all the time and Kittle needing to be the most physical guy and CMC taking all these hits, like give BA more looks if you guys sign him. Like if you sign him to wide receiver one money, he needs to have a wide receiver one role. You can't, he can't have the fourth most targets on the team. Like that's just not how it works.
No, exactly. And honestly, like if there's a time to change up your play style, your offensive approach, it's this year. And the reason being, like, you've beat your head against a wall against this Chiefs team year in and year out. You've gotten to an NFC championship game countless times. You advanced past that a couple times, and yet you continue to run into the same problem in the Super Bowl. And there's a very real scenario where we as fans, like, I sit back and I go, let's run it back, same system, same everything right now. The Niners are like, no. We still have these dogs on our team, but we need to change something now. Like I said last year that the window was closing, and I thought that it might be last year. This is it. This is the year because everybody's stock from here goes down. Like it's already kind of trending down. Not that they're getting worse by any means, but they're getting older, and these injuries pile up, especially for
Mhm.
guys like Deebo. And if there's one last shot at it with a what is hopefully a very healthy Deebo, a very productive Deebo this year, this is it.
Yeah.
And the 49ers, like, if you want some availability on those receivers, on Deebo, on George, on especially Christian McCaffrey going down the stretch, you're going to need to bank on these guys who can make a play without running into somebody's chest.
Yeah.
So Brandon Ayuk is the kind of guy who can get open by making a couple moves, get wide open, and then he's down the field. And that's something that the 49ers need to really bank on and lean on if they want to have this sustainability going forward.
I agree with that take wholeheartedly. Like, because like, and it's everyone like everyone can kind of be due to like regress to the mean, kind of like how the Eagles did. Like, I'm not gonna say it's gonna be that dramatic, but like, what are the odds that CMC is gonna put up 2,000 all-purpose yards again this year? What are the odds that he's gonna be able to put up as many touchdowns as he did last year?
Right.
Like those things are like Brock Purdy, like I mentioned. Like, what are the odds he's gonna be a top 2 MVP candidate next year? And with like everyone being aware of what he's capable of and what we can do now, so it's those are the things that like the marginal things are you're gonna have to pay attention to, and like one or two bad losses could like set this whole thing off the rails and set the vibes on a totally different direction. And that is something to look out for, because as much as these guys have been through, you wonder where they're as a human being, you psychologically get to a breaking point. And
Yeah.
so hopefully with these additions, you get guys that can take some of the pressure off. That you guys will most likely have to find different ways to win, but like you said, last year was probably the best chance you'll have, because just like the Eagles did in 2022, both of our teams were blowing teams out. We looked far and away like the best teams in at least the NFC. And and we each had a shot, and we were each 3 points away. Like it was like, got as close as you can. And to try and come back and do that all again is mentally challenging. And I got to witness that firsthand this year. And I hope it doesn't happen to like an extent to the Niners, because I do think the Niners are a good enough team to continue to, stay up top the NFC West and contend in the NFC. So it's like that's gonna be something I'm gonna keep an eye on all year for San Fran. And like, because that could be in the modern NFL a trend that we see to a degree. Like these teams that look awesome make it just a hair away, and then what happens after. So that's something I'm definitely keeping an eye
Yeah.
on for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's going
All
to be
right.
interesting.
Do you have any final Niners takes or anything before we get out of here?
Not a final Niners take, but I am like, we're officially like in the off season mode for both our our three teams, but like obviously the NBA playoffs are still going on. We're going to talk about that next week, but I'm I'm really hyped for the NFL season. We're months away from it, but like I didn't know if I'd be back this early into
Yeah.
this mindset. So I'm just happy to be back. I'm looking forward to it. I think the future is still bright. Niners fans, keep your head up. Eagles fans, I hate y'all. I love y'all, but
Exactly. No, I feel
you
you.
guys got a squad. So it's I think both our teams are going to have really good years again. I really do. It's going to be who has the better year.
Yeah, and had the Eagles not choked off, not winning the division last year, we would have had a matchup
Yeah.
for all the marbles
Thanks for
this
that.
year. But now you get to beat the Cowboys for us again. I'll take it. It's no big deal.
We beat the Cowboys every year, though. This is old.
But this helps. I'll take it. But yeah, no, like Ben said, we'll talk next week on how I sold our bracket for the NBA playoffs, and we'll some humbling takes. And again, as the offseason goes, we already have plans for like win totals, what we think everyone's going to be, and we're going to do some would you rather's with some of our guys, because I have some juicy topics to throw at Ben in terms of who might, who would we take and stuff like that. So definitely look
I
forward
said you
to it.
were I said you were elite at your drafting, at your viewpoints into the draft, but in terms of your playoff NBA playoff calls, I'm not sure if I can
Yeah,
bank on that same take, man. I'm a little upset with you. We could have won $1 million. What's
I
going
know.
on?
I look more and more like a casual fan every day with that with each playoff game that happens. I'm so disappointed. I'm like, damn, Ben nailed his picks, and I just knocked us down here. I was like, geez. So I have humbling takes on why I was wrong, and it's gonna be fine. But it's cool. I like, honestly, NBA playoffs have been fun. I'm excited to talk into that next week. But
Definitely.
the NFL draft was awesome. I'm happy we got the guys that we did. For the Eagles, I'm the window like reopened in a way that like it feels brand new. So I'm hyped for that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, sir.
All right. With that being said, this was episode 40 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Hit us up on our social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, all that fun stuff. Want to watch us on video? Follow us on YouTube. Give us a like, subscribe, all that fun jazz. We're here for it. Leave a comment of any kind. So I am Marcos Conan, and beside me here, as always, is
Benny the Jet Rets.
all right, guys. We love y'all. We're going to be talking NBA next week, so stay with it. Peace.
Peace.